Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and it's time for this week's Friday Morning GM with co-host Vas Larikos. We're here on Thursday, Thanksgiving Day at noon, recording this. Vas, appreciate you making time.
Absolutely. Want to wish the Ravens flock a happy Thanksgiving. Good game, quality win on Monday night. Still too many penalties, but the seventh best DVOA offense in history can overcome quite a few mistakes. So Ravens are sitting in good position as I see it.
Spectacularly efficient offense. Still had a couple of penalties, which were bad. Stalled 2 of the 9 drives they had. Another one was obviously knelt out, but a hell of an efficient game otherwise for Lamar Jackson and the Ravens offense. And good risk management by John Harbaugh in this game. Really beat the crap out of his brother in terms of the game management components in winning this football game.
Absolutely.
All right, we got a piece of bad news after the game, and it's one that I think affects the Ravens offense somewhat severely with broken arm for Charlie Kolar. Played the fourth quarter, getting through it. He's out at least 4 weeks. This is the kind of thing I think that's the absolute minimum timeline. Right now, if we could be told we'd have him back for the playoffs, I think that'd be fantastic.
Agreed. I think he has not been placed on injury reserve as I know. Has he?
No, he was. He was placed on injured
reserve.
He was. They have not replaced him yet.
Okay. Yeah, it's a tough blow. Charlie was playing really well, especially in some of those where he would leak out after the block and give Lamar a target. Saw some big plays from that. It was good to see Mark Andrews in the Wildcat instead of Charlie in the earlier portion of this game. But, he's had a good season. Primarily he along with Ricard as the primary blockers from the tight end position.
Yeah, they have multiple choices. I guess they can do. They've gone very heavy. 1.98 of heavy players, fullbacks, tight ends, offensive linemen, 6 in this last game. So they've got a couple of different ways they can go with this. They've got Kadir Ishmael, who's sitting there on the practice squad and was impressive during camp, less impressive in the preseason games this summer, but has a little, he's a converted wide receiver, converted quarterback from Villanova who has some blocking ability, put David Ajabo on the ground during camp, notably. I don't know how great an achievement that is on the current state of affairs, but other possibilities, I think they could go to the street and get a third blocking tight end. Where are you on that?
Yeah, I could see that as a possibility. An Eric Tomlinson, Billy Badgema type of guy who's still kicking around somewhere. Worst case scenario, I think they can roll with 3 moving forward. It still is a good group. You'd have to see some more snaps from all 3 of them probably, but I think they're relatively healthy. They should be able to manage a little bit of a larger workload. You'd probably lose a little bit of something as far as your 12 personnel base blocking, but maybe you gain that back with Isaiah Likely's yards after the catch ability or something like that.
Right. So it definitely it changes 12, it changes 21 in either case, particularly if you want an inline tight end where you also will have Ricard in the backfield, but it really changes 22. So if you're dealing with somebody like Andrews being an inline tight end, or sometimes in those packages you use 2 inline tight ends and you'd have Andrews and Likely there. That's just not as powerful as you'd probably like at the line of scrimmage. I think another possibility is the Ravens go to some more OL6 play, and we'll see a fair amount of Ben Cleveland now. Like we may see Ben Cleveland 4 snaps more per game because they want that extra big body in there.
Yeah, they could certainly use Ben when they really just want to plunge it up the gut. But Kolar, the beauty of Kolar was his versatility. He's a better receiver certainly than Ricard, I believe, and almost as good of a blocker and a better blocker than the other 2. So he was a valuable player. But knock on wood, overall they've been relatively healthy this season.
Yeah. All right. Well, and not unexpectedly, it was at the top of our list, or at least near it, was Eddie Jackson, released in the past week since we last had a show. Might have been right after it, in fact, because the show was on Friday, I believe. Nothing was unexpected about this, and we get to the end of the Eddie Jackson era in Baltimore, and you look at his season statistically, and it's awfully similar to the last 4 years in combination. Maybe a little bit worse, but then he's a little bit older, so you kind of expect it to be a little bit worse. It's an unfortunate thing, and it shows you there really are no free choices. Even when you go cheap, and you go for a player on the margin who you think might be better, you have to do some of that because, hey, that's roster construction, is having to make difficult choices and having to make compromises and hopefully having those work out. But roster spots are not cheap. It's like whenever you see people picking up garbage by the side of the road, I think manpower is not a free resource. It's not something that you have an unlimited supply of it. And in particularly when they use the military to do that, I'm like, this is not cost effective use. If you want to have community service people picking up garbage, all right, it's a little closer to a free resource, but you still have to expend resources to get those people to the spot and whatnot. It's just tough. And in this case, the roster spot is the thing you're giving up.
Yeah, disappointing that it did not work out in Baltimore for Eddie. I was optimistic when he was acquired. You wonder if maybe he comes down with one of those interceptions in the game where Marcus sat. Maybe he had a different trajectory here, but I think it is a cautionary tale that sometimes these late August, early September scrap heap type of players don't pan out. Not everybody does work out as well as a Ronald Darby or as Davian Clowney or a Kyle Van Noy. And it's a little bit risky to rely on filling a couple roster holes that late, because now the Ravens really are paper thin at safety.
Yeah, they ended up with a lot of inert material on the roster, and in terms of guys who could not play the back end in a split field role. And it's not like they don't have a lot of safeties on the roster. They have Kane and they have Braid and they have Williams still on the roster, and Ar'Darius Washington and Hamilton, of course. So they have 5 safeties on the roster, and the Ravens have not always carried 5. They've often carried 4. But the problem is you got guys taking up safety spots who are really just special teams players in Kane and Braid. And you have Williams, a guy you don't even want to put on the field because of a host of other issues that swirl around there. I mean, they'll do it in an emergency, I'm sure, but I don't think they want to have him out there again.
Right. And if you suffer an injury, then you're, to the guys that are starting now, then you're really in a tough spot. So it's tough. Marcus May was a player that was released by Miami, who could have probably filled that role. Unfortunately, the Chargers claimed him above the Ravens on Friday. So
weird turn of events there with the Marcus May situation. A guy we've had our eyes on the entire year, talked about on this show multiple times in terms of him being a guy who could fill at safety. He's actually played very well this year. 11 targets, 22 yards. It's some minimal playing time, but it's still some targets and some coverage snaps. That's really terrific. That might be exactly what the Ravens need on the back end. He's got a long history at free safety. And in just a really weird twist of fate, the 2 teams that are after him are the Chargers and Ravens. And the Ravens win over the Chargers on Monday night, which, you wouldn't trade that for anything pretty much. It is what exactly costs them Marcus May, because the Chargers, of course, flipped ahead of the Ravens in the order. I'm 70% sure the Ravens put a claim in on him. And the Chargers basically we're 1 spot ahead of the Ravens, or maybe 2 in terms of being in the right place to take him.
Waiver order. Yeah.
Order.
Surprised Miami released him. But you win some, you lose some. I think with the safety depth, as you said, Kane and Braid are primarily special teams only players or emergency garbage time type of players. I think the next move would probably be converting one of the cornerbacks to a safety position if necessary.
So Brandon Stevens probably, or would we be thinking Tre'Davious White, or who would you think?
I think it could be even Desmond King could factor in the mix, who's the practice squad player, who's also a zone-based corner for most of his career. Desperate times call for desperate measures.
Yeah, I would agree. I think King I would put up there. Very, very interesting the way the secondary has panned out these last couple of games. Marcus Williams is now clearly just emergency depth. He's played 1 snap each of the last 2 games. If you missed it, I don't blame you, because he was playing in there for the second to last play of the first half in the deep middle of a quarter package. So they had 3 safeties back in that position. They still gave up an 11-yard play, then a 19-yard play or whatever it was to let Dicker get his field goal attempt off at the end of the half. I guess what I'm most bothered about by this current team is that the lack of safety depth is precluding packages. So I guess I'm not as concerned about Hamilton being on the back end as his primary role as I am the fact that you can't put Hamilton up front because there's no way to get that done with the personnel they have right now.
Yeah, agreed. It's certainly an issue there. I think Hamilton played about 70% of the snaps on the back end. The other, he was used more as a dime backer in the last game. If you have those numbers in front of you, the issue certainly is he makes more plays close to the line of scrimmage. I believe I saw a statistic that he has not been targeted on the back end the last 2 games, not even once. So that shows the kind of impact he's having on the quarterbacks who they're targeting. Fortunately, they do have Marlon Humphrey, who can do some of what Kyle Hamilton does as a he's not a big nickel, but he's a physical nickel and he's a playmaking nickel. So you're not bereft of any playmaking ability from that position. And we've seen players, even Arthur Mollett, that's just sort of a position that lends itself to playmaking close to the line of scrimmage. But yeah, it's certainly an issue. Kyle Hamilton last year was on all pro level playing that primarily as the big nickel, and he can't do that anymore.
Well, the Ravens, the other odd thing about them defensively these last couple of games now is they've gone to a lot of this four-corner dime. And, I sometimes have trouble impressing just how different that is from the Ravens' regular dime. The Ravens, throughout their history, have effectively played a three-safety, three-corner dime, one where the dime back, the additional safeties in the game, almost always lines up at a weak side linebacker spot. Okay. And he's effectively a short zone defender. And oftentimes you're in some sort of sticks defense on third down. You're defending an 8 or 9 yard, cushion you want to play in, and you want good underneath zone defenders. So that's why, your third best safety is almost always better than your second best inside linebacker in terms of coverage. You bring him on the field and you gain something significant. That's not the same thing with the four corner dime. They almost always line up man opposite on a man for man basis. And they're really depending on the over the top guys to bring the back end of the bracket that they have. So it's a very different way to align in the dime. The Ravens in this last game used 3.11 cornerbacks per play. And if you think about that, they had a couple jumbo sets where they only had one corner on the field. And if you think about what that is, and you have base defense where you play two cornerbacks on the field, that's a lot of extra cornerbacks on the field for the game. Four guys had 50% plus snaps, and then all five saw time. And in fact, all five made contributions, including JAD.
Yes. I'm intrigued by the four cornerback dime in theory. I think the fact of getting more speed on the field and more players that are cover specialists is better. But as you said, it does tip your hand a little bit as far as more man coverage. It's a little odd to see a cornerback lined up against a slot receiver, an off man 10 yards off the line, 2-3 steps deeper than the linebacker. So it's definitely a different look. But you got to put your best players on the field sometimes, and this safety situation has forced that.
Yeah. Braid was the only DB who didn't get a snap in this last game. Do you want to take us through the injury report that was out yesterday? Now we don't have a new one for Thursday, but we have Wednesday's injury report and some good, some bad.
So it's an estimated. This was more of a walkthrough practice. I think that's important to note. But they estimated Roquan as limited, Sanusi Kane back as limited, Kyle Hamilton not on the report, certainly a good sign. Travis Jones still limited with that ankle that he's been fighting for a month now. Arthur Mollett, DNP. So that's seeming like a more significant issue. And then the new addition, unfortunately, is Kyle Van Noy, DNP with a hamstring/neck. He only played one snap, according to your notes here, Ken, against the Chargers. The snap shares.
That's right.
I'm concerned. I'm concerned about Van Noy's snap share. But one piece of good news as well. Michael Pierce back limited. His window has been open to be re-promoted or signed or activated, I should say, to the 53. So that's certainly a very good sign.
Yeah, there are people who think that he could play against the Eagles. I'm not buying it. I think it'll be probably 2 of the 3 weeks taken. I think that he'll, if I had to guess, I think he'll be back against the Giants immediately after the bye, but he could actually be activated after that Giants game because it's a 3-week window. It starts on a Wednesday. He has to be activated by the Wednesday 3 weeks from now, which would be after the Giants game, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but it is. And that might make the most sense. They need him back tremendously down the stretch. Jones really needs a week off. And I guess maybe we hit a question we've been kind of hitting back and forth here is Kyle Van Noy. I think they were trying to get off the field at the end of this game and reduce his snap share, possibly with understanding of he's working with several physical problems that don't seem to be connected. Travis Jones just does not appear to be himself completely with the ankle in terms of his ability to push off and really get the kind of penetration you'd hope for. And then you got Roquan Smith, who's had a difficult game. Is there a scenario you could see where the Ravens try and give all three of those players essentially a very light workload, or possibly even the week off, to give them the double week to recover for the stretch drive with the Eagles here?
I can see it. I think it's an intriguing idea. I would need to know more about the what's the word I'm looking for? The injury, the severity of the injury, and the rehabilitation prognostication. So if they can play at 75% this week against the Eagles, but they're only going to get to 85% when they come off the bye, versus if they rest them for 2 weeks and they're at 95% coming off the bye, I think that's probably a trade I would make. Van Noy in particular, and they did, I believe, Tavius Robinson led the outside backers in snaps this last game, and Adisa Isaac, his snaps jumped up to about 20. Ojabo's still been deactivated. You got to find a way to rest Van Noy, because he's a key player. They just don't have a whole lot of proven pass rush ability behind him.
Right. It would give Ojabo a chance to get back on the field too for a little bit. I don't know how much he'd play relative to Isaac. Isaac, most of his playing time was at the end of the game, so it was with Van Noy out basically on that final drive. But I could see a case where they split more time. What was nice about this last game is they had 5 defensive linemen active. If they deactivate Pierce for a game, then they'd be going probably with 4. I guess they could get to 5 if they activate both Wormley and Tupou.
I believe Tupou's out of elevations.
They have a spot on the team right now,
right?
To
put him on the 53.
Yeah.
And then he would be replaced by Pierce when Pierce is ready.
He could be, and honestly, now we need to go through that. Is they have other guys. Christian Welch is another guy who's ready to be cut when the time requires it. He got the start, which was a pretty cool thing for, I think, Harbaugh to arrange with Orr. I mean, first of all, great use of Orr, I thought, in that game in terms of rotating through a group of backup linebackers, which is one of the reasons why I'd even consider the notion that the Ravens should do that again versus, Saquon Barkley and a pretty big Eagles line. I have a little confidence after seeing him juggle Board and Simpson and Welch and Harrison. Yeah.
Let's touch on that while we're here. Inside linebacker played beyond Roquan. I thought Harrison played after the first drive. First drive was not his best, but after that, he played well. He's bigger than Roquan, and certainly not. I mean, Roquan's an excellent tackler, but I didn't think you saw a big drop off there. I was surprised that Simpson did not play maybe a little bit more. Board played okay. He missed at least one tackle, but he played a little bit better in coverage than I remember from his first stint. So
they used him in that on the first stint too, was to be a third down linebacker in the Fort/Bynes era. Really, it was more in the second Bynes era when they didn't have Fort. So it was really the Bynes only era. But Josh Bynes, even though he had pretty good instincts and got in the lane well, was not a guy you wanted on the field on third down.
Right.
And it was definitely surprised by the amount of playing time that Chris Board got. And if you ever wanted to believe in the platoon linebacker system in order to save money at that position, this was a game you'd present as evidence that, hey, you can do it.
Great point.
All right, still got 2 guys. The IR DTR for Pierce, I believe, will be the Ravens' 4th of the season, so they'll still have 4 left. They only have 2 guys they can really use it on currently, which is Tampa and Hardy. So it looks like this is a year the Ravens won't go through their whole set of these. It could well be a situation where, because any new player hurt, by the way, and I guess Kolar fits into this category, would be another. I got to add him to this list, don't I? he has to get hurt, and then he also has to be ready to play 4 weeks later. That's a tough quinella there, a tough exacta to hit.
Yeah.
And it might happen, but if as we get to week about 16 or so, I could see a place where either Tampa or Hardy, or possibly even both, are activated to practice and then revert to IR if no injury occurs, which is something they did with Malik Cam last year.
Yeah, I could certainly see that for Hardy in particular. Don't see a role. All 6 receivers dressed and contributed in this last game. Tampa, I think they could use. I mean, the way the secondary is going, you can use, but he has to get healthy, obviously, first. So, if Tampa was to be healthy, I think, and you needed a roster spot, maybe you'd look to one of the other rookie safeties and see if Tampa can take the role, because he's a player with a better pedigree and hopefully a better long-term outlook that you'd like to have cut his teeth a little bit this year.
Yeah, you'd certainly like to have him cut his teeth, but there's even a certain value to getting him back practicing. If you can only do that for 3 weeks, you're paying for the season anyway. There's no difference in the amount of cap dollars spent. You might as well use an IR DTR, get the guy back on the practice field for 3 weeks, and not totally hose the year developmentally for him. Now, I said the same thing, by the way, about David Ojabo 2 years ago, and look where we are now. We didn't really get a lot of value from that additional time practicing, but I think there is something to be gained in Tampa's case specifically in terms of getting him back on the field.
Agreed, 100%.
All right. I always like to go through kind of the next transactions. And what amazes me about the Ravens this year is they have an awful lot of space available on their roster right now with minimal pain to get there. And you start with the spot available for Kolar, who went to IR, and I do not believe they've made any corresponding move. Now, by the time you hear this, they may have, because they may well do it in advance of the Eagles game. But I think you got the possibility of Sanusi Kane going to IR, even though he practiced, in theory, it was a projection. He practiced limited yesterday.
Yes, I think Kane could go to IR. I think Tupu is probably a player that might take that 53rd spot, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. And then when Pierce is ready, then Tupu will be relegated again. Rasheen Ali is still on this roster without really contributing much at all. And as the 4th running back, essentially, it's been like that the whole season. I can't remember a year where the last 3 spots were kind of like, these players didn't quite earn a roster spot, but we don't have anybody better coming out of camp. Almost every year there's 2 or 3 guys that you think did earn a spot that didn't quite make the 53.
Spark something uncommon this holiday season with just the right gift from Uncommon Goods. If you haven't finished your holiday shopping yet, don't panic. We've got a secret source for incredible original gifts, and that's Uncommon Goods. They've got unique, hand-picked gifts for everyone on your list, all in one spot. Gifts that spark joy, wonder, delight, and that it's exactly what I wanted feeling. Somehow, they know the exact perfect gift for every single person you know. Whether it's a football fan or a book lover, they've got unique gifts. Myself, I got some drinking glasses that have the blueprint of Camden Yards on it, as well as some nice ceramic ice cream bowls that are the shape of the Baltimore Orioles helmet, just like the plastic ones you get from the stadium, but I keep them in my cabinet, specifically for ice cream after those Oriole wins. So when you shop at Uncommon Goods, you're also supporting small artists and independent businesses. Many of their things are handcrafted, made in small batches. So go ahead and shop now before they sell out this holiday season. To get your 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/ravens. That's uncommongoods.com/ravens for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, because we're all out of the ordinary.
Perhaps a product of not necessarily hitting quite as well on day 3 of the draft, and just the attrition that comes with paying a franchise quarterback, but not quite as deep of a fit 1 through 55, I would say, as most years that I can remember.
Or even 57 with some guys on IR that you're bringing back. But the Kane and Braid in particular, and this is true maybe to a lesser extent of a player like Tez Walker, they're at positions where the Ravens have perceived their own need during the season, and certainly perceived it enough to go out to the street and get players. I'm talking the street for Deontay Johnson was actually a trade, but in terms of the acquisition of Desmond King, say they did actually go to the street. They just got some specialists on the team for special teams in an era where I think teams really need to avoid that. If they're coming up with a plan for 2025 and how they want to look at things, that's got to be one of the areas they'd look at is we got to avoid special teams only players and get guys who are special teams plus players. They have some defensive role or some offensive role, perhaps, that goes with their special teams characteristics.
Malik Harrison comes to mind. He's the prototype. But a niche, whether you're a kick returner that can play as a third down back or something of the sort. And I don't have a problem with Braid or Kane, even though it's such a late pick. But I'd rather take a flyer on a player with more upside because they're defensive or offensive contributor than earmark a draft pick specifically for a special teams guy. Because the Ravens have proven so many times they can find those guys without expending a draft pick.
Yeah, it's a great point. You think about this, about the 7th round picks, the late round safeties they've gotten, and Geno Stone falls in that group. And they did kind of fumble the football at Geno Stone and let him get away from them. Right. They had to get him back. So they can't really point to that as a great draft pick for themselves. And from that sense, but there have been, Zach Sealer and other players that they found late that they can get defensive value out of. And it is a shame when they don't do that. Tez Walker, another guy who's been around now. I'm glad he's getting the year to practice. He's really providing the team only special teams value at this time. So he's very much like a Kane or a Braid in that way that he's not really getting on the field to play any meaningful snaps. Did play 2 snaps this last game, which was something.
Yeah. Maybe there's a situation where you have to go 4 wide vertical at the end of the game. And he's a player that can help you there hypothetically, but it is what it is. Maybe this is an area where they're going to try to bolster next year, as you said, and try to make a little bit stronger group at the back end of that roster, whether that's through the UDFAs or maybe drafting a little bit better on day 3.
Right. The Deontay Johnson saga has been one that just has not been particularly exciting. It's one of these things I really want to keep the receipts on people's expectations for Deontay Johnson. Then on the other hand, I'm not looking to rub anybody's nose in it. Not really. It's just be reasonable. Please, folks, be reasonable about your expectations of older receivers coming to the Ravens and what kind of an impact they can have. And even when they plug and play pretty well in terms of their traits, which is, by the way, a very dangerous and potentially arrogant way to analyze players. Mm-hmm. A lot of potential arrogance you can run into, and believe me, this is from someone who's done a lot of that in terms of the draft. If you can go to specific traits on the field, and you can say, I know this guy will fit into the Ravens system. The Ravens had 2 good receivers. They almost never play 11 personnel. That combination doesn't lend itself well to it. And then you come back and you've got 2 guys who maybe they lit a little bit of a fire under in Wallace and Aguilar. Who are just playing at a much higher level.
That's the point that I was going to make. I think maybe the biggest benefit of the Johnson acquisition was to motivate Aguilar and Wallace to step their play up. You see that in the work environment all the time when you hire somebody new. Everybody sort of buttons up and puts out their best foot forward going forward, at least for a little while they're trying to make a good impression.
Great point. Yeah, that's the Jack Welch theory of firing your bottom 10% of managers every year. Maybe it's 20%. All right. Let's move on to the mailbag, take some questions here because we got a great set of mailbag questions. You guys must have like very easy holiday weeks leading up to this, but a lot of thought went into these. So yes. I'll start this off, and you take the first crack at this from Alec Poulianis, who was just on the show, Do the Defense the other night. He said, doing some research on the Eagles, and they just cut defensive lineman Siaki Ika. I'd try to claim him too, not just for intel, but more importantly, IDL depth. Thoughts?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I really enjoyed your segment with Alec talking about 4th down decisions on the show you did this earlier this week. I think the IDL depth is a lesser issue now that Michael Pierce has returned to practice. I haven't seen the details of his contract. Ika, I believe, came out of Baylor. He's just a wide body kind of guy. If you think he can give you more than Tupu while Pierce is practicing, then maybe you make that move. But if Tupu's already in the system and playing decently well, maybe I wouldn't jump at that one necessarily.
I'm not that excited about Siaki Ika, the player. And that's basically the problem, is that I just wasn't that excited about him in the draft. You look at PFF, he hasn't scored particularly well in terms of what he's done for the Eagles. I'm just not that excited about him as a player. But you hear the term in college often ascribed to big men who don't do much except for post up, have a shooting range of about 4 feet, and otherwise are a wide body who may or may not have any box out ability to get rebounds. Okay. He's got 5 fouls to give. Okay. His most valuable asset is his 5 fouls to give. The thing with a player like Ika is his most valuable asset may be his 3 practice squad elevations. So if you want to get him for the practice squad, sure, go ahead. I mean, there's certainly players at the end of the practice squad you can cut and make room for a player like Ika.
Yes. Just one more point, though. I just recall, I believe the defensive line coach was Baylor's D-line coach the last few years. So maybe there is some familiarity with him. So it might be intriguing. Good thought, Alec. Let's move on to a bits question. What will we have to see from our Darius Washington at safety for the remainder of the year to not consider using a high pick on a safety in the 25 draft? Do you think safety is on the table in the top 2-3 rounds, regardless of his level of play?
Okay, I'll start and I'll just say yes. I think absolutely free safety, specifically characteristics, are on the table at the top of the draft. Period. I probably almost would never take a safety in the top 3 rounds if I wasn't getting free safety ability. And the exception would be like a Superman type player like Kyle Hamilton, who could do it all, or Derwin James, that kind of player. If you want to get a safety who can literally play anywhere you want him to, Micah Fitzpatrick, those guys are worth it. But I want a free safety if I'm drafting one high. Ravens have a remarkable ability to get dime backs, box safeties, strong safeties. Anybody who doesn't have a very clear above average value in a split field situation, they have the ability to pick those guys up, all the way down to the 7th round. I think it's on the table, and I think it's something they really need to do. I think they're so thin at the position, and they're so limited in terms of what they can do with Kyle Hamilton. I don't think it matters even if our Darius Washington is 150% of what they hope he could be. I think they still need another safety.
We are in complete lockstep on that. I would certainly be targeting a safety. It's probably a top 3 need as I project this roster forward. I think we have another question that can get into that a little bit more, but is free safety is the premium skill set. Strong safety is not, but free safeties are scarce. There's about 4 or 5 or 6 at most, really, every draft that can really play free safety. So you got to draft them if they fall in your range.
Let me get to another A-Bits question, which also kind of hits on the free safety thing. It says, I'd love to hear your contrasting thoughts on the draft in 25. The Ravens desperately need youth and talent at non-premium positions: interior offensive line, interior defensive line, safety, among others. Where would you allocate draft capital? And does need trump the premium position hierarchy? First of all, fantastic, well thought out question. I want to appreciate you, A-Bits, for putting something out. It's also very much speaks the language that Voss quite frequently uses with regard to you want to draft premium skill sets with your early round picks and avoid even top players at positions that are non-premium or how I call them is more common size and shape positions.
Yes, more devalued or more available, more abundant positions. So as I look at this roster, I don't necessarily see a huge need for youth on the IOL if you're projecting Voorhees to be able to play left guard with Faalele still under contract to play right guard. I think you're in pretty good shape on defensive tackle, at least going forward to next year with Travis Jones and Matabike. That's one of the top duos in the league. Safety, I think, is certainly a need. But I do consider free safety, as I just mentioned, to be a premium skill set. It's not really skill sets. Does your skill set do more to help the pass game or the running game on both sides of the ball? If your skill set does more to help the passing game, I believe that's a premium skill set. But just looking at this roster, my top priorities with Ronnie Stanley unsigned are left tackle And then I would go to outside linebacker because I think you need some depth behind Van Noy as he approaches his 37-year-old season, I believe. And with OA not locked up long term, and you really, I'd like to have a 3-man rotation this year, but you certainly want to have that next year. And then free safety would be my third need as I'm looking at this roster and projecting. Now, that'll certainly change when there's some players released and some acquisitions. But as I see it now, Ronnie's not locked up. I think left tackle has to be your number one.
Right. And I'm in the same position. Now, the IOL, I might disagree with you on, though, that the Ravens may need to consider another interior offensive lineman. First of all, you gotta continue that train moving along the tracks and get another interior offensive lineman so you keep the developmental train going. They're going to lose Ben Cleveland. In all likelihood, they're not going to re-sign him. I think they're probably going to lose Patrick McCary to being priced out of Baltimore. Now, it may be the high penalty total this year will keep that from happening because that's certainly been caustic.
Didn't happen to Simpson.
Exactly. And so if other teams can overlook that, and if other opposing GMs are looking at the PFF grade as more important than the penalties, as I would weight the value of those things, then they're going to be okay with signing a Patrick McCary. And I think there's always a certain arrogance in any new team with a new offensive line coach and saying, you know what, give me John Simpson, give me Patrick McCary. I can fix that penalty problem. And I'll take the rest of the things he does well. And honestly, McCary, they haven't tapped in as much this year into the versatility to play tackle. They have done some early in the year with the rotational play with Rosengarten, but he's been quite valuable to the Ravens this year, even with all these penalties. Is the truth of the matter? And I'm I don't know what the number is, but there's a number I'd sign him for that would be non-trivial to bring him back, even if it's effectively to play a 6-man role again.
We had a related question, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks ago, as far as Lamar being able to elevate the offensive line. Does that allow you to save resources at offensive guard? So I'm still of that mind. I think Lamar needs good tackle play, and he's receiving good tackle play. I saw your grades, and the tackles played well, and the interior players did not. You also run into the problem if you're going to take a first-round guard of the 5th-year option, as we're seeing with Tyler Linderbaum, how all the offensive linemen are paid as one position group instead of tackles versus IOL. So I'd be against that, at least in the first round. If there's a guy you're in love with on day 2, I guess I'd be okay with it. But I'd like to try to save where you can, and that to me on offense would be guard and hypothetically running back down the road.
Right. So the rare skill position at the offensive tackle spot, with particularly left tackle, with you want mirror probably first, length and anchor in there both at number 2. Anchor may be more important than length, even though they've gotten by with some lesser length in terms of having McCary play there. And there've been some other guys like Ryman, and the Colts always seem to have a bunch of short arm left tackles, but it is a very difficult set of characteristics that you want to put together in what usually is a man that's at least 6'5" or higher. In terms of size. There just are not that many of them, and so you want to take your shots. And to the degree some of that is lottery tickets, it's not dissimilar at all to the fact that 7-footers get drafted in the top 5 when they prove nothing in a college career in basketball.
Right.
Who's the guy, the Maryland center, Len?
Alex Len.
Alex Len. So a decade ago, 15 years ago now, whatever it's been.
Diamond Stone was, I think, also drafted. I think he was in the 2nd round, and I don't believe he's done very much. And he was another 6'11" center. Size and shape pool, as it all seems to always kind of come back to that for some reason.
The other position that I don't want the Ravens to consider themselves as done at, because I think they really need to rejuvenate, is at corner. And yeah, they picked Nate Wiggins, and that really worked out. They have no idea what they have with TJ Tampa. No idea at all. Corner, is he a corner? Is he a safety? Is he moving? Will he be a slot guy? Is he going to be good enough to play on the outside? They probably are going to, I would think, extend Marlon Humphrey this offseason, if I had to guess. Reduce cap this next year. And then you're still left with losing Stevens. You won't have any claim to Tre'Davious White, although they could try and re-sign him this next month to an extension. But my guess is Tre'Davious White doesn't need the money and probably, is happy moving to free agency.
If he plays well enough that they want to keep him, he's probably going to be too expensive for Trey White.
Yeah.
And then JED's up too, right? So, yeah, you need depth. You need at least 3 perimeter cornerbacks, no question about it.
Yeah. And I've really, honestly, I've never been more optimistic than having 5 right now because JAD is a fine 5th cornerback. I don't want him. I pretty much don't ever want him as the 4th corner. But he's a fine 5th corner and made a contribution in the last game.
Yeah, it's good depth to have. Even if he plays for his career, if he contributes in some way at the cornerback position, now that's more valuable from a 4th round pick than others potentially. You have Desmond King maybe, but you don't want to be in a position where Marlon is forced to play outside with Wiggins and Hamilton's forced to play the back end. And yeah, you can piece it together at nickel and they'll find somebody that make plays, but that would really take away a lot of playmaking potential next year if that's the case.
Right. I completely agree. Let me go to the next question here. It's from Connor Kellerstrass. Connor, appreciate your many contributions over the season here. Do you think the performance of Harrison and Board will lead to more snaps for them and less snaps for Simpson even after Roquan comes back? And he said, I think
you said that.
I might have said that. Sorry about that. Okay, let's leave his question.
Okay. I'm a little bit unsure, to be honest. I did expect Simpson to play above Board, ahead of Board last week, and he did not. And, I'm not sure how the team graded Board. I thought it was up and down, but I thought it was more up than I expected. Simpson had done enough to earn that role. Harrison, I think, is not a great will. He can play Mike pretty well. He can play Sam on rundowns or rush side on rundowns and set the edge. But as far as being that Patrick Queen type of will, I don't know if he and Roquan next to each other give you enough really in coverage. I don't think his zone coverage between the two of them. So I don't have a strong opinion about that, to be honest. We'll see how it shakes out.
The value and versatility for Harrison on the defense is similar to McCary on the offense in terms of just what they bring this team. I cannot even explain to folks how unusual it is to have a guy who can play both inside linebacker and outside linebacker in today's game. Inside linebackers have gotten smaller. Outside linebackers have gotten bigger, more towards the Suggs level of guys. And Harrison reshaped his body to do that. And he's shifting on a down by down basis between outside linebacker and Mike. And it's remarkable. He's a 2-down Mike only, as far as I'm concerned.
I heard you talking about that on the show with Alec. I believe Albert McClellan had one game where he was forced into action to play inside, and he also played a little bit outside the same game. I think it might have been a night game, or a Sunday night game, but it's been a while. But that's the only one I can ever recall doing both, and potentially even doing both in the same game.
Right. With Suggs, when Suggs was hurt in 2012, the beginning of the year, Albert McClellan was actually the Ravens' starting right defensive end, I believe, in the first week of the season. So just it boggles the mind in some sense, some of the versatility. And then the other guy you'd point to, who I think a lot of people know, is Jarrett Johnson, who did move not on a down by down basis, but moved between positions.
Sure. I guess we'll get to the last question here by Sean via Twitter X at @bmore_sky_high. Do you guys see a path to Keaton Mitchell getting involved on offense without an injury occurring?
I think it's a little unlikely at this point. I think they're too happy with what Hill has given them. Hill broke out of kind of a little bit of a slump this last week. They still use him on a lot of very difficult pass blocking situations that I don't think Mitchell gives them that element. Hill can go to the body like nobody in terms of, well, maybe you'd rather have Derrick Henry doing it in terms of chip blocking, which they do a lot of. They really protected Rosengarten very well this last week with chip blocking, and also is in the top 40% probably of running backs in terms of just being a stand-up set blocker, despite being a smaller running back.
Sure. I'm holding out hope for Keaton to make an impact. I think it's been a slow ramp up, to be cautious, off of the the knee injury, and I do think we could see a package of plays after the bye that the Ravens are saving for maybe the Pittsburgh game or something of the sort with Keaton. So it's a nice luxury to have playmakers like Keaton Mitchell, like Deontay Johnson, like Isaiah Likely in some regard in this last game that are not necessary because the Ravens have an abundance of skilled position talent and they have depth to call on when necessary. As long as Lamar is executing at this amazing level, they'll find a way, and somebody new can step up every game, and that's going to be vital in the postseason.
Would you have loved to see Mitchell running the play that Hill did for the touchdown, just to see what his legs were like? Because I'm not sure he would have gotten there, but it would have been very interesting, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. Yep.
All right. Always a pleasure doing the show with you, Vas. Tell folks where they can find your work online or contact you just to ask a football question.
Sure. I'm on Twitter X at Vasilis Fiamata, VASILISFIAMATA. And always enjoyed talking strategy, GM, talking ball, and really looking forward to this Eagles game. Should be a really good matchup.
All right. Other folks out there, really appreciate it. Happy Thanksgiving, of course. And please keep filling the hashtag Film Study mailbag bin for us. It's incredibly great to have content that's so well thought out that helps us get started down these thought experiments, because that's a lot of what the show is. We report a few things about the players, but your contributions are tremendously valuable to making the show good. And we want to thank you for it. For Vas Laricos, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye, and we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.